Hey everyone, thank you for joining me today for today's webinar. Today we'll be talking about Pathway's DataPort API and how this helps you connect your data to the rest of the software that you use. I'm Nick Singer, the CTO at Pathway, and I've spoken to most of you. Nice to see you all join today. We'll be answering questions at the end, but feel free to email me your questions or ask your assigned CSM as well once you have them. So, real quick, today's agenda is just going over how DataPort works. How does Zapier play into this? We'll do a quick live demo to show you that it's not hard to set up. We'll run through a bunch of use cases, and then I'll just give you the next steps before we jump into QA. Okay, so let's dive into it. Okay, so first of all, why DataPort? Back when Pathway was starting, once we had sort of the email editor done, the CRM portion done, once we had a product going, before we could actually work with our insurance brokers, we actually had to get connected to their BMSs. So that was one of the first problems, one of the first challenges that we had to solve. So we did. But this challenge remains whenever you want to work with additional software, right? So right now you do have data. There's a lot of interesting things you can do with your data, but it's hard getting it across to a different platform. It's hard getting data from other platforms into a central spot as well, like your BMS. And while this can be solved in a lot of cases, sometimes with modern APIs, sometimes with less modern solutions, it costs money, right? So it costs development time, it has a long turnaround, and it has a lot of potentials for issues and problems. And if you're not doing it with integrations, if you're not doing it with any sort of automation or scripting, then you're doing it manually, right? So you're manually getting reports out of your system and you're uploading them into another CRM, another lead tracking tool, an upsell tool, some sort of reporting tools. If you're doing that manually, you're going to start having issues with accuracy and consistency of getting that data across. And if you're having issues with data consistency, this is going to lead to delays in what your software can do and how it's running. It's going to lead to serious inaccuracies as well as inefficiencies in the way your brokerage runs overall. So how does DataPort work and how does it play into this? So Pathway already integrated with your BMS, right? I see most of you are Pathway clients, but even if you weren't, so the first step would actually be getting connected to your system, getting your Pathway account going. So DataPort leverages what we've already done to get your Pathway account going. We provide a modern web API for your team that they will enjoy working with. You've probably heard them tell you about challenges they had with the different APIs they were using. Either they could even access them depending on the system and depending on the structure or network limitations or what have you, or it was just too hard to maintain and build on. Also, the API comes with Pathway specific stuff. So it's not just about the data per se, it's also about things that Pathway can do for you through this additional option of automation. So besides the things that Pathway already does for you. And it's available in Zapier. And this becomes important to help further save on development costs. So let's talk about that as well. Why Zapier? So a little footnote here, we're not affiliated particularly with Zapier. We're just another software that is listed on their platform as something you can connect to other software, right? So Zapier is this sort of hub for APIs. It lets you quickly drag and drop different platforms like a Slack or Teams or Google Sheets or Google Forms or HubSpot and just link them together without going through a development team. So as long as you have access to the different software, you can just do this yourself with a little bit of time. And I'll show you that later in this webinar. So how does DataPort leverage Zapier? First of all, we had DataPort done a year or so ago, but weren't ready to market it because up until this year, it was not as useful to a broker that did not have a development team. So we worked on adding it to Zapier. And now that it's on Zapier, it's actually something that a brokerage without a development budget can leverage. And even if you have a development team, they'll appreciate this. Like we use Zapier internally, even though we have a development team, even though I can write code as well. This is, in a lot of situations, using Zapier is just faster and makes more sense. So if I can just figure something out within an hour through Zapier, there's no reason to send it to a dev team to work on it for a day, to test it for another day, and then to have back and forth tweaking it, if we can just have it running. Zapier also lets you train multiple apps together. So besides Pathway and a Google Sheets and a Microsoft Teams, it doesn't have to be a one-to-one link. So you can have multiple steps in there. So you can create complex and creative setups. A very sort of talked about combination is perhaps you have a lead show up in your BMS with specific criteria. Maybe you create a quote for that lead, right? You get this through Zapier, you get it into a lead prospecting tool that adds more information about that person. You then take this information and pipe it into ChatGPT, also through Zapier. And you ask ChatGPT to do a little bit of research based on the info you provided them, and also to draft up an email, a follow-up email for a prospecting campaign or an upsell campaign. You then take that draft, pipe it into Outlook or Gmail, and just have it sent out. Or you write it back into the BMS's instructions for your broker, all through Zapier, right? And I'm sure you'll come to more interesting ideas as well. We'll run through a lot of them. And of course, automation. Pathway, our whole thing is automation, and this is no different. So DataPort combined with Zapier also helps you automate a lot of this. So if you Google DataPort Zapier, you'll find our dedicated page on Zapier, Pathway. You'll find Pathway on Zapier, and you can scroll down and find a list of triggers and actions. You can see what's currently available. So you can trigger zaps, which are these actions in Zapier. You can trigger zaps when a new policy is created with certain criteria. You can trigger zaps as a renewal comes up. You can trigger zaps as a new client is added to your BMS. Also, you can use triggers from other software and use that to create an abeyance or an activity through Pathway into your BMS, and also create a client, like a lead, post a lead right into your BMS, so you don't have to do it manually, or just use this to trigger a flow that's already in your Pathway account. So these are the available items right now, and we'll talk about some of these in more detail. Okay, live demo time. Just to give you an idea of how quickly you can get up and running with this. To set the stage, this is a demo account I have on Pathway. I have the Zapier demo upsell campaign. And for whatever reason, I cannot trigger this automatically from the data that I have in my Pathway account. There's some data coming in to the office, maybe somebody based on phone calls that are not tracked, etc. So I need a different way to trigger this. So what I do, I set up a Zapier upsell spreadsheet in Google Sheets, and this can be any sort of spreadsheet online tool. And I start putting in customer codes or lookup codes or account numbers, depending on what system you're using. And I also set up an upsell target in a separate column. So I can say, okay, I want to get this to Nick C, and I want to trigger a cyber upsell for him. Okay, so that's a new row in my sheet. And now I have this Zap set up. And mind you, this is on a free Zapier account. So you can do simple ones on free Zapier accounts. I connect my Google Spreadsheets account or my Gmail account. I set it up to trigger on a new spreadsheet row. I configure it to that spreadsheet, and then I can try it out. So when I get a test, I also get sort of a list of rows that are in there that it's detecting. I can say find the records, make sure it's finding the latest one I just put in. Yeah, Nixie, Cyber, it's all in there. And I can continue with this record. My next step would be filtering. So I just went, I would go in and add a filter step here just to make sure I only want to trigger this in Cyber, right? I don't want to trigger this in Home in this particular case. Maybe I want a separate Zap for Home and Auto and things like that, or a separate flow and pathway for those. But let's say for Cyber, this is the one I want to use. So I just filter that. Okay, moving on. And then I do the add contact to flow. And just to show you how quick this is to set up, I'm just going to delete these. Oh, hold on. I want to remember the number. Yeah. So I'm going to delete these chips. Just going to keep this one. Again, it's just configuring the spreadsheet. I go in, find the filter option. I choose a field. I say upsell target exactly matches Cyber. I say continue. And it gives me a quick test. Okay, it found one. Awesome. And then we do pathway. So we put in pathway here. And for pathway, we pick add contact to flow as the event, the action. I pick an account. I know it's this one, my Nick demo account. And then I have continue. I pick the flow ID, and then I map the customer, the contact C code in pathway, which is, the customer code, the account number, etc. So we do that. I map that over, continue, and I do a test. Yeah, and a lot of times it might already be in there. Oh, actually, you know what I did? I don't have a client with this. I don't have a client with this customer code. So it also helps you debug. So I can say, let's do another one. Let's do one for Milan. Also Cyber. So let's try this again. So moving back here, configuring the rows. I can pick the one we want to try out, find new records. Here we go. Spreadsheet row F with Milan P. I say continue with this record because I want to be able to try it out at the end. I hit continue on the filtering since we already went through that. And now, yep, so that's the one. And now let's try adding a contact to a flow. Let's retest with Milan. Yep. So we send that data, and if I go back into my pathway account, I can go into contacts here, and I can see Milan is going to be added to this flow. So that's real time. So you can try this out real quickly. Let's see another example. This time it's the other way around. So this time we're starting with pathway and moving it into something else. So I have a really quick one here where I say a new policy that is created, anything after June in my demo account. I have a quick example here that I can review, just make sure that it makes sense. I continue over to the filter step. And here I say, I only want to target auto policies. I only want to target policies assigned to the staff code N, the CSR code N. And then I want to send a Slack channel message. So I wanted to send a Slack message with custom instructions, says there's a new auto policy ready to go. The policy number is, and here I can basically just put in all the different merge tags like you would do in Pathway. So description, billing type, branch code, etc. You can put this in the message to customize it, customize what the message looks like, and hit continue. And we say we can retest that because I tested this before, and it basically posted a message to my Slack. And yeah, we could go publish this to wrap it up. But actually, okay, I actually didn't want to have it running, so let's just turn it off for now. But that's how you would do this. So it doesn't take that long. And you can find all the different combinations here on Zapier. So if you Google DataPort or Pathway Zapier, you get our page, and here you can pair it up with other apps. So I can say, okay, how does Pathway work with, I don't know, let's say Google Calendar. So I could say, we could see all the different triggers and actions available to us in this combination. So we can look at the triggers being like a new policy or a new client, or the triggers could be something from the calendar, like an event canceled or an event starts. And of course, whatever happens, you could always filter down, right? And then we can have it the other way around here as well, from an action or a trigger standpoint. So there's a lot you can do. And if you're not sure, you can just put in the two apps in Zapier and see what your options are. So because we could be demoing this for a long time, let's just go in and start listing out some examples instead so that we can cover more ground. This is probably going to be the more content heavy part of the webinar. So do make sure you're taking notes or grabbing screenshots if you see an interesting use case. Okay, then we can talk about it later if we need to, if you have further questions. Okay, so let's see what we can do with this. If you're using another CRM like a HubSpot, Salesforce, or Zoho, you can use this setup to sync leads. So a new client being added to your BMS with specific criteria, you can sync it automatically to HubSpot and then do what else you need to do there. And in some cases, you can even sync this lead back, sync a new lead in one of those platforms back into your BMS if it supports this. Besides syncing the leads, if the lead's already in there, you can instead just trigger a follow-up from that CRM. You might already have something built, or you can just build something out. So using this as the trigger. And then as communication goes out from a different system, you can use DataPort to push this information back into your system, back into your Pathway account, and basically as activities and then into your BMS, right? So it basically acting as your audit log. If you're using some sort of lead gen platform, like an ad platform or online forms or anything else, again, you can sync leads, you can trigger campaigns in those platforms, or you can sync data submitted in those forms into your system, right? So you can you can post the quote information in an activity or a note or an abeyance into your system, and then your brokers can action on it. Or you can chain it with other events and post it to your Slack. I mean, even besides that. And then if you have analytics on your website, tracking leads and prospects, and you have some sort of like abandoned quotes kind of deal on your website, you can track this and then trigger a write back when that happens, right? So that your brokers can action on that and maybe give them a call, do a follow-up. Some things we've seen in the wild with DataPort is basically brokers building out their own sort of internal platforms that they've already had, but DataPort lets them take those platforms to the next level, right? In ways they couldn't before, just because their dev teams would struggle with getting the data they need. So using DataPort, they can provide their clients on that other platform or on their website a list of policies, a quick policy summary, access to their documents. They use this to pre-fill data on forms, on specific steps in those forms. They use DataPort to validate data. So if somebody's entering something, you can make sure that it makes sense. You can make sure you're targeting the right clients, policies, etc., using the DataPort integration. You don't need a client opening up their physical documents and figuring out what they should be putting in. And then, of course, if you have a change request mechanism on that platform, you can push those change requests as activities and abeyances back into your BMS. Overall, pushing data back into the BMS becomes very useful for audit logs and compliance. So even things like emails, if you're using Office 365 or G Suite, you can push the communications or the subject lines at least back into the BMS for DataPort, or you can sync maybe specific highlights that you deem important into a spreadsheet and then action on them further. If you're using third-party invoicing tools, you can push copies of those invoices back into your BMS. Or when a payment happens or a payment is late, you can push payment notifications to your team. I suppose you're using some kind of team chat, be it Teams or Slack, or maybe even WhatsApp. You can post lead information into that channel. So you put a lead gets added to your BMS through some other mechanism. You do some filtering, and then specific leads you post into this channel so that your team can work with it. You notify your team to give the lead a call. Maybe it's an existing client that you're trying to upsell. Again, whatever you need to do based on the data available to you there. Or you can use this to create to-dos for your team, like specific instructions. It doesn't just need to be a data dump. You can customize the message completely. And then you can automate sort of weekly or monthly updates and summaries for your team if that's interesting, like, premium bound, policies closed, quotes created, etc. Make it something like have a dedicated Slack channel for updates so that your team doesn't have to go and generate a report from the BMS every time. If you use some kind of project management tool, ticketing tool outside of your BMS, you could use DataPort to trigger the creation of tickets in those tools based on the data in Pathway, right? So new client, a new policy, etc., with a specific criteria creates a ticket. Or the other way around, if the ticket moves through the different stages, for different statuses, it posts an update somewhere, it pushes something back to the BMS, it notifies somebody if it's done, if it's closed, if it's blocked, etc. And then again, not just an audit log, you push back instructions for your team to your BMS as well, based on what's happening in these ticketing systems. And then there's Pathway and the built-in functionality. With DataPort, you could do something creative like when a call is done in an outside, in a third-party call system, just have them added to a prospect workflow, like the demo I just showed. So it doesn't even have to be an automated call system. It could just be a spreadsheet with instructions. Just tell your team, put in leads into this sheet if you want an automated message flow to go to them. And in Pathway, you can also limit it so it never goes out twice to the same person. So you can avoid issues there. But that's one thing you can do. You could also use a similar kind of setup, but instead trigger NPS surveys after interaction with the support team. Or not just leads, you can do this for upsell workflows, right? So as something happens in an outside system, you get more info, the campaign is done, or it's just getting started, trigger an upsell workflow in Pathway when a status changes in another CRM. And then one of our most powerful features are the filters, right? So we expose the segments and the segmenting options in DataPort, so you can leverage this in other software. you basically create a segment in your Pathway account and it becomes available in your DataPort setup. So you do all the complex setup for like a cross-sell or an upsell. They have commercial policy with no cyber. They have a this with a specific limit, etc., or they don't have this. You use that, create segments that you can then query from another system or through Zapier. You then use this for cross-sell and upsell and win back on other platforms, or follow-up steps based on what's happening in Pathway. Or you do this based on new policy downloads as they come in, or policies as they move through the different stages in its life cycle. So that was it real quick. Just to recap, so DataPort lets you connect your data to other software with or without a dev team. So the dev team can make good use of a DataPort API, but it's also with Zapier now, it's useful without a dev team as well. And also the dev team can also leverage Zapier. This lets you automate even more things that you couldn't before. So we already automate a lot of your office work, your transactional emails and things like that, but this adds an additional layer. Overall, reducing manual entry and just finding new creative solutions for the challenges your brokerage is facing. So what would be the next steps? You would add DataPort to your Pathway account. It does have a setup fee. You can find the pricing on our public pricing pages in Pathway, or you can get a quote from the team if you reach out. You can reach out to your assigned CSM or myself. And if you're not sure what DataPort could potentially cost you month to month, once you've seen the pricing, let us know and we'll brainstorm some use cases and some numbers for you, because it is based on API call. But you'll see that you get a lot of API calls there for not that much. And if you're using it, laser focused, it won't really cost you that much. You get the credentials and the documentation from us, and you also get a consulting call with us if you need more ideas on how you can use this and some suggestions on what you can do, and if you have questions of how something works. So some caveats for transparency. This is a work in progress, so it's always going to be improved. So right now, DataPort is limited by the BMS integration into your Pathway account. So if there isn't a field right now in your Pathway account, it's probably not going to be available in DataPort. And if we're not getting eDocs into your Pathway account, we can't use those with DataPort. So just sort of as a short rule of thumb there. But ask us, we can certainly see if this can change depending on your situation. The BMS data updates in Pathway are daily. So as DataPort is as current as your Pathway account is what we're saying here. We write back hourly or daily depending on the setup. And this, in the case of DataPort, can be made more frequent, of course, just to make it closer to real time. But reach out if you're not sure. Reach out about your use case, and let's see what this would look like for you. And also Zapier, it's not free, right? So I am using a free account. You can get 100 Zaps a month for free. After that, you need to get a premium account. But the idea there is still, at the end of the day, if you're setting up Zaps or automations that are bringing you value, really, that's not, Zapier is not going to break the bank. And also with DataPort and Zapier as well, it only becomes expensive if you're trying to do like big data dumps between systems, because it's priced per API call. If you're doing like drip campaigns, lead campaigns, prospecting, triggering specific things, automating things that are taking time away from your team, then it makes perfect sense. But I'll let you review the pricing as well. And yeah, as I mentioned, it relies on the data that we have in the integration. Future plans. So right now you have a bird's eye view of the policy in DataPort, but not the individual risk or risk details or coverage lines. This is something we're looking on adding in the near future. So you can use this in your campaigns there as well. We're also looking at just letting you create a lead within Pathway, because contrary to what we initially thought DataPort was going to be used for, this has been coming up as a request several times. So we'll be doing more in that sort of direction, basically just letting you control what's happening in Pathway. And also in that same sort of bucket is generating Pathway form links or survey links. So use DataPort to get a generated link that you can then use with another system, with another automation for Zapier. And we're also looking at how DataPort plays into flows. We're looking at potentially adding dedicated DataPort action into the flows, so that as your Pathway flow runs, you have a step there that actually triggers Zapier or triggers something else through DataPort using a webhook, which is basically just an API call to another system. And this is 100% driven by your requests. The things we've done so far were things that somebody found useful or wanted to be able to do, to use with Pathway. If what you currently want to do is not possible, let us know. It's going to drive our roadmap for sure. And then obviously as more requests come in, priority is going to go to the requests that are more often that are interesting to more brokers. But if you get your requests in sooner, more likely that we'll get to them in the shorter term, right? So do let us know what you're looking to do, and let's see if we can help you get there. And now for the QA. So we had somebody ask, how do I connect with Zoho? So let me just dive back in to the DataPort page on Zapier. So without knowing much about what's available here on Zapier, you can always go look for Pathway DataPort on Zapier and then type in the platform you want to use. So we have Zoho. And in this case, the question was about triggering emails from Zoho. So we scroll down with Zoho Mail selected, and we find the triggers and actions. And let's see what this integration could do. So with Zapier, without a development team, you can have a new policy or a new client be a trigger from Pathway, or a new email matching search in Zoho Mail be a trigger, and then do something in Pathway based on that. Or you can use one of those triggers in Pathway, like a policy or a client or a segment, to do something within Zoho, like create a new task, create a tag, create a draft, send an email. So these are the things you can do. A question also came in about Act On. So if I go back to the search page, and I'm going to type in Act On here. So let's see what's available with Act On. Scroll down. And again, we look at the triggers. So these are the points that can trigger the actions. So a new client, a new policy, a new renewal in Pathway, or a new form submission in Act On, a new automated program external call, and things like that. And then it can all lead to an action from something else as well. And the action can be adding a contact to a marketing list, creating a form submission, updating or creating a contact in the system, etc. So if you're not sure if it's possible, this is a good starting point. And then if something's missing, you know that there's some functionality in the system but it doesn't show up here, it's up to the platforms here. So if you're missing a trigger or an action for Pathway, you would reach out to us and we would see, where that is on the roadmap and if we can add it. And if you're missing an Act On trigger or an action, that's up to them, right? So we don't control that, neither does Zapier. Act On is responsible for their own triggers and actions, and Pathway is responsible for ours. So, if it's something we can help with, do let us know. Okay. So that's it. Thank you for joining today's webinar. If you have any further questions about this, do reach out to your contact at Pathway, anyone really. You can reach out to myself as well in Slack or email, and we'll do our best to answer your queries as soon as possible. Thank you and have a great weekend.